Last October I watched a movie every single day and did a weekly recap. I found that to be exhausting, and I saw a lot of lackluster films. There were some good ones in the bunch, however, so this year I'm going to go look back at some of the best reviewed films of the year, and do quick reviews of them. Today's film is VHS 85, released only yesterday, or October 6th. It's the 6th VHS film, and the 3rd yearly release on Shudder. I was disappointed by last year's 99, but impressed by 94 before that, so let's see how this one compares. Also, since this just released, I won't be able to show any footage, though I'll have some other stuff in the background. If you prefer just to listen, that works too. I'll try to keep these as spoiler-free as possible, as they're recent films. This one goes very heavy on the VHS style effects, with lots of scan lines, glitches, and bad quality, as well as bits of commercials between the main shorts. None of these are particularly remarkable, and they take the place of an overarching story, but they contribute to the atmosphere. I prefer an actual framing narrative, but they're not boring and they take up little time, so overall they're solidly neutral. The closest thing the film has to a wraparound is David Bruckner's Total Copy, which is a self-contained story, but spread throughout the film in 5 evenish chunks. It's a decent plot, if a bit basic. An alien suddenly appears and a group of scientists study it. Then things go wrong. There is a bit of a unique perspective, however, as it's presented as a documentary about the events, with a narrator and interviews. The whole thing would be very mediocre, but the ending, at least the last 5 seconds of it, makes the whole thing worth it, and is incredibly funny. That's something I noticed about the anthology. The dark humor is much more frequent and seemingly intentional than previous attempts. The first full story is Ambrosia by Mike P. Nelson. It features a fairly standard premise. A bunch of kids go camping in a no trespassing area, but the acting is solid and it moves at a decent pace. When the actual horror starts, there's a good bit of tension, and then there's a twist, but the segment just sort of ends. This is very strange, as there are no answers or even a final act. All this is answered, however, in No Wake, a segment that occurs later in the film. It starts with a much more interesting idea and then connects up to the previous one in a clever way. It's also the funniest segment and arguably the darkest. It still doesn't answer all the questions presented, but it's enough that the two stories together feel like a complete whole, and reward the viewer for paying attention. These combined are definitely the best in here, and help hold up some of the weaker parts of the anthology. The second story is directed by Gigi Saul Guerrero, and is called God of Death. The whole segment's in Spanish, which is a nice change of pace. It starts off with what seems to be a natural disaster, but then in the end, it's a monster. This one feels a bit flat for me, with a fairly striking opening, but then a lot of walking around and worrying. The final reveal was unexpected, but they also linger on it for just a little too long, lessening the impact. Still, the effects are good, and the actors play it convincingly. It's just the exact same monster movie short that's been done before. After that is Techno God, from Natasha Kermani. It begins with a cringy one-woman play about gods and the advent of new technology. This includes showing off a virtual reality helmet called an iPhone, which seems like a dumb joke, but it's based on an actual device released in '89, so it gets a bit of a pass. While this segment has some amazing gore in the end, and a decent monster, it takes way too long to get to that point. If you're into slam poetry, this might work better for you, but it just didn't work for me. Next is No Wake, which has already been discussed, and the last full segment is Scott Derrickson's Dream Kill. This one stretches the found footage premise to its limits, but there is at least an in-universe explanation. It's definitely the creepiest segment, with a few scenes that are very inspired by Sinister, one of Derrickson's earlier films. It's also just a solid little story, with some good build-up to the final twist, and the right amount of characterization. With shorts, it's easy to end too early or start too late, but this one finds the balance well. It's a solid cop serial killer horror, with a healthy dose of giallo. Also, just like all the other segments, really solid gore. So that's the film. Overall, no segment was amazing, but they range from decent to great, which is the kind of consistency that is often lacking in anthologies. In terms of the series, I would rank them 2, 1, 85, 94, 99, and finally 3. Despite the flaws of the lesser ones, however, they all have at least some parts that are worth watching. Anyway, I hope you're all having a nice October, and that you've enjoyed this video. Be well.